This is Stacy McKibben with the Master Communicator podcast, where CEOs, senior leaders, and C-suite executives share their advice. It's 6 questions in 9 minutes because the best leaders know how to share their ideas concisely and quickly. Let's jump right in. Question number 1. In a few sentences, please tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, Stacy, thanks for having me. I'm Elizabeth
Sure.
Pimper. I spent 20 years in the Navy and about 8 years ago transitioned out, and I've been in the civilian world ever since then. And my time in the civilian world has been primarily focused in the human resources sphere. So people, change, training, all those great things.
Oh, so then you're like the perfect guest to have on this show. I'm super excited to get your ideas. And I'm sorry I can't help it, but thank you for your service. I really appreciate that.
Well, thanks for your support.
Of course. Question 2 for you. What's the best thing about leading people through change? I can imagine we've experienced quite a bit of change this year with the pandemic. And I'm curious from your perspective, what's the best thing about that?
So when it comes to leading people through change, it's kind of like when you lead people through training, it's seeing that aha moment when they connect with what you're doing and they understand what's in it for them, how it affects them, how they have an impact on it, and how you can make everything easier for them in the way you lead through change.
You can almost help them to become embrace it more, right? Instead of
Absolutely.
resisting against it, which can create a lot of consternation for them personally.
For
If
sure, for sure. And that's a big part of the leadership. And it's about having that communication, making sure that communication is very clear and making sure that you're working with other people before you just decide we're gonna make this change for everybody.
don't worry, you'll love it.
Absolutely. It'll be great.
The greatest fear of everyone is the unknown. So no problem. Jump right into this change without any ideas.
Exactly.
So thinking with that in mind, then, next question, what piece of advice would you give to other leaders about implementing change?
Best piece of advice I can give is talk to people. And I mean, from the beginning, before you decide on the change, because I think we've all seen it where somebody has a good idea and they say, let's do it. And they don't step out and think about the impacts it's having. So talk to people, talk cross functionally, talk up and down also. You may not realize what your change will do downstream, the second, third, fourth order effects. So if you make a decision, we're going to make this change, but don't, I think the corporate term is socialize, don't socialize it properly, you will potentially have negative effects. So as leaders, we need to involve other people than just ourselves. We need to make sure that, again, we are talking cross functionally and up and down to consider the impact of the change on the business, on the employees, on everything.
And I love that because I think there's a stat around like the further high up in the organization you get, the further away from understanding and knowing the details of what actually happens on the front lines, right? So you think about changes like this, and if you don't actually get out and trust your gut, but verify that you're
Mhm.
on the right track, you could really, take somebody off the wrong path there, it sounds like.
For sure. And we're going through all this with COVID. Think about all the different policies that are being rewritten, but
Wow.
we haven't thought about, well, how does this impact Jane, who's a single parent, or John, who's has, taken care of his elderly parents in his house, or maybe it's fine for Sally because Sally can work remotely, but what about your hourly employees that can't work remotely? All of these different things have to be considered, and we can't expect our senior leaders to know all the answers. That's why we all exist, and that's why we have to communicate and ask the questions.
That's amazing. I love that. And again, I think it's counterintuitive sometimes as you get higher up, the more you need to ask, right, of others and don't assume that you know everything, which can be hard for some of us who maybe struggle with the imposter syndrome or things like that, where it's like, I'm supposed to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
I,
100%.
I often hear from other leaders, especially during this time period, that keeping their teams engaged remotely has been a challenge, right? That they're finding themselves as managers way more stressed out because they can't do that drive-by management thing, right? They can't like happen upon a conversation or a phone call because they happen to be walking by. And so they tend to now over check in, right? They're kind of driving their teams crazy a little bit with this. I'm curious, what are your thoughts? What are you seeing and how have you guys overcome that, if at all?
So my whole career, I've had people that weren't physically where I was. And while it may seem to be over communicating, I think communicating more than you would think that you have to schedule. So like a weekly one-on-one isn't enough when you're not in the same location. I've found that in the era of COVID, people have embraced video technology a lot more, and there are more options now, not just Zoom, which is great. We love this, but also Google has one, I forget what it's called. There's also Teams, which is through
Yeah,
Microsoft, and all
Microsoft.
those different technologies are available. And if you want to have that connection with your team member, having the body language through the video makes a huge difference. And just checking in. It doesn't have to be every day, but making yourself available on that regular basis is great. I've also found it to be very helpful to use the chat functionalities in your systems more regularly. So another Teams thing is where you can chat over, and I've got it open all the time.
Like
So
an
I have team
instant
members.
message or something like
Exactly.
that. Mhm.
Exactly. So that when something does come up, if you've established that relationship with your team members, they'll just text you like, hey, what are we doing about this? And then oh, let's have a conversation. Or here's the answer and move forward.
Mhm.
So that they stay engaged still. But you may have to over communicate. You may think that you're over communicating, but be more transparent. Let people know what's going on, even though you think, oh, they know. They might not. They're not there necessarily. And even if they are, they've got so many other things on their minds that, especially this time of year, but with COVID, everybody's got so many things on their minds. We just need to make sure we're sharing with them. And that's what's going to keep them engaged.
Yeah, and don't assume that they're on the same page just because you guys had that same conversation or whatever. I'm
Yep.
always reminded, how many times do we remind our kids to say please and thank you before we stop that process? I'm pretty sure my mom was doing that to me on her deathbed, even, please and thank you.
Yep.
It's just something we always do. So,
Yep.
what daily practice do you think is most important as a leader, to you as a leader?
So I thought about this, and I get up early. I think that's been ingrained in me, and that's not the practice. I mean, I get up early and I have my coffee and I do a little workout and stuff. But it's really sitting down and prioritizing my day. I like to do it before I end the day, but looking at it again, so at least I've got a plan. Because I know that the saying is no plan ever survives first contact. But at least
Mhm.
I've got a plan and my priorities, and I know that if something crazy happens, well, I've got to get 1 and 2 done no matter what. The rest of them I can move around, juggle. I want to get them all done. It's a nice to have, but just having a plan, it makes me as a leader feel more confident going into the day.
I love it. Write your plan, work your plan, right? Write it
Yep.
down, then go to work on it.
Yep.
So, magic question number 6. What other successful business leaders like yourself should be on the podcast? Who should we be paying attention to out there?
Well, I thought about this too, and so there's she's just now starting her own company, but her name is Dr. Cindy Young. She's all about knowledge management, and I know that she's got a history similar to mine, and she's all about, again, knowledge management, change management, helping people make sure we don't lose sight of things. Needy Dewan is another one. She's trying to help expand people's minds when it comes to those interactions and taking care of themselves as leaders. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm a Ken Blanchard fan from the word go. I'm sure you are
Yeah,
too.
for
He is, I
sure.
mean, I've been a fangirl since I first read about him in college, situational leadership model with him and
Mhm.
Hershey. And I just, everything Ken Blanchard, I can't get enough of it. So,
I'm a huge fan myself, for sure. That's great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Elizabeth. It's been an absolute delight to hear your ideas and insights. I'm curious if somebody wanted to reach out and say hello or introduce themselves or learn more, how might they find you?
The easiest way is to go to LinkedIn, just Elizabeth Pimper, definitely on LinkedIn.
That's perfect. And my audience knows I'll have a link for them there below the video, and they can definitely find you there to introduce themselves. Well, again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. We hope you come back someday. This is Stacy McKibben with the Master Communicator podcast. For more ideas and insights, please do go check us out at www.concilioteam.com. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care.